What's going on, people, and welcome to another episode of Too Many Games and Not Enough Time, where I get to speak to incredible gamers from across the globe about the games that they love and what they've been playing during the pandemic. Now, thank you once again for all of the love on the rebrand. Remember, if you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes or any audio platform, make sure you come over to the video, give us a thumbs up and give us a like. Now, on today's episode, I have the host and founder of She Play Games. I'm talking a fellow Jinx TV presenter, one half of the Final Fantasy Union. You can catch her crushing on Tidus and making moves in the game. Lauren Kaye, welcome to Too Many Games. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for such a, it's just, I love the way you open things because it's always so hyped and so much energy. It always makes you just really want to jump in and just do things. So thank you so much.
Do you know what? I'm super excited to talk to you because what's really funny is known about each other for a while, but we've been talking so much in DMs about Final Fantasy, about games we don't like, about games that we do love, and just going ham. And I was just like, you know what? Come on the pod. Let's talk about this. Let's get our love of Final Fantasy. Now, firstly, I want to say I am a huge fan of Final Fantasy Union. This is an incredible YouTube page that is dedicated, YouTube channel that's dedicated to Final Fantasy and really breaking down the lore, and what you lot do are incredible. So I wanted to give you your flowers on that and kudos on that. But let's go straight back. How did you fall in love with this franchise? Why does it mean so much to you?
Oh, of course. So my first memory of Final Fantasy is sitting on my brother's bed, watching him play through this weird game. I was just like, this is really fascinating. He was being chased by a giant mechanical spider on a beach. And then all of a sudden, this girl comes out of nowhere with a machine gun and shoots down this spider. And I was just like, that is the coolest woman I've ever seen. And I didn't know why I didn't say anything at the time. I didn't even ask him, like, what game are you playing or anything. But I ended up, like, forgetting about it, went to the mall and went into a store called Sam Goody and saw characters that looked very similar to the characters who were in this scene. And I was just like, I'm going to buy it. And sure enough, it was Final Fantasy VIII. And that was, like, it just propelled me into this deep adoration for Final Fantasy in general. I loved all of the characters in VIII, the music, the story, like anything you can think of with VIII, I just adored and went back, played all the other games. And my love of Final Fantasy just continued from there and continued to blossom. So that was really the proponent. A girl with a machine gun shooting down a mechanical spider. I mean, you can't get much better than that.
That should have been on the box art. You want this game? There's a girl with a machine gun shooting down a mechanical spider. Like marketing 101.
Oh, Quista's trip. Like, she is just, I mean, lust for teacher. Like, she is just such an amazing woman.
It's so funny because, like, so many people fell in love with Final Fantasy from 7 and so many people fell in love from Final Fantasy from 8, and anyone I know who played 8 first, even though they love 7 and they talk about how great 7 was, 8 is always like their child. 8 is always like the love in their heart and their favorite in the franchise. Where are you? What scale are you when it comes to 7 versus 8?
I mean, I really started to love 7 after the remake, if I'm honest. Like, I really adored how they handled the remake. I think that, you know, other than maybe like the plot changes, which were like, whoa, what is going on? I just really loved what they did with 7. So Like I adore 8 and I need to play it again because there's so many great sequences. Squall is such a complex and deep character that I don't think a lot of people give him enough credit for. And yeah, it's a tough one. It is literally choosing children. But yeah, 8 just, I think because I'm such a fan of prog rock, it always kind of wins out because like all of the songs in it, like Man with the Machine Gun, they're all like extreme prog rock, even the extreme. And I'm just like, Nobuo Uematsu had the funnest time writing the battle music for this game because it's just so good. Oh, 8, love it.
So me, I'm more a 7 because 7's my first Final Fantasy. So I've never played anything before 7. So I haven't played
Sure.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. 7 is my starter and love it. Like Cloud Strife is one of my favorite protagonists in video games ever. I really like Squall. I never loved Final Fantasy 8 the first time I played it. I loved the art direction. But I wasn't even going to go down this direction yet. But why, oh why, is Final Fantasy music so good? Like, I feel like the music in Final Fantasy is probably more epic than in any game franchise I've ever played. And I've played so many games and I love so many games, but like, when I listen to Aerith theme or when I listen like so many songs, even like Final Fantasy 13, which is like not even one of my favorites, even the soundtrack in there gives me goose pimples.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting chills right now just thinking about like a new Bodem in Final Fantasy 13 too. I love that song so much, and I actually loved the fact that one of the vocalists on that track actually did the Ghost in the Shell. I don't know if you ever watched that show, like the
Yeah.
opening song to that. The fact that she was a part of like one of my favorite songs from Final Fantasy 13 too as well. I was just like, this is speaking to my soul. This is obvious that I need to love this. But in terms of like why it's so good, they just really like Nobuo Uematsu with the first sort of like 9, 10-ish. He just did such a fantastic job in making everything feel so unique but so essentially him. And I think he just had such a fun time. It seems like he had such a really creative experience creating all of these incredible songs. I think he's really passed on the torch to Soken in Final Fantasy 14. The music in that is just on point. But yeah, I mean, if there's anything that Square Enix is really has and will continue to get right, music is just, it's just boss.
And like I was talking about earlier with Final Fantasy 7 Remake, like I love Final Fantasy 7 Remake. Like I said, Final Fantasy 7 was always my favorite, and I really loved when they did Advert Children, like actually seeing that kind of that realistic Cloud and stuff like that, and them actually the game looking even better than Advert Children, like blows my mind. And the way they remix the tracks and the transitions, like the way you're like, say you're Barrett and you're out and then you're just running around and the soundtrack's there, but then you go into the battle and the battle theme, and then I'm just like, they really care about these games. And it's crazy because Final Fantasy, obviously, it's an epic tale. Every game is different. It's all kind of set in its own world, and they've kind of had like they've had a bumpy ride. It's not like every Final Fantasy's been great. Some have been ultimately trash. But one of the Final Fantasies that have always been a pinnacle on my life and blew me away the first time I played was Final Fantasy X. Like Final Fantasy X for me is just such a epic tale. First of all, Tidus just being so happy and bubbly, because when I think of Final Fantasy protagonists coming from like talking about Cloud, talking about Squall, like it was very kind of broody, kind of emo-ish, but he was just so happy and it was just so bright. And the first time having voice acting and just being able to walk around the world, like how did that game change your opinion on gaming?
Oh my gosh. I actually had an interesting introduction to that game because I kind of like stopped with the PlayStation 1 era for a while because I just was a kid and couldn't afford to buy a PlayStation 2 or convince my parents to buy me a PlayStation 2. So I was just kind of like, okay, I'll just wait my turn. But my brother, he had a PlayStation 2 and he had a save file where all of his characters were doing all of the damage. Like they had all their stats maxed out and stuff. And it was right at the very end. So I actually played the ending of 10 before I played the actual full on game. And that ending is just so good. It's just the music, the animation, like everything about Final Fantasy X's ending sequence is just absolutely incredible. But I do love a deeper side of 10. So since we've been doing Final Fantasy Union, for some reason Daryl and I keep coming back to 10 because of like the depth of the narrative. One of the things we found out recently, or what we sort of discovered, is how it's also a very good interpretation of how privilege can affect your future, in the sense of like Seymour Guado. He was half race, and then Yuna was half race, but Yuna is human in Al Bhed and looks like human. She can blend in quite easily. Seymour can't blend in easily, so he's rejected, and so that's why he becomes so twisted and horrible, because society completely abandons him because the Guado don't like him and the humans don't like him, so he has nowhere to live. And I think like that like way that they challenged how we view people was really incredible, and something that I don't really think a lot of the other Final Fantasies had done before. You know, surface level, it's like you see about Al Bhed and how Waka treats the Al Bhed, but like when you start peeling away the additional thing, like you think of Guado as like high society, and like
and
the
even
humans
with
kind
Jet,
of stuck in between. Yeah.
Even with Jekt and that real kind of rejection of their child, like we don't get into that kind of thing. So yeah, it's really interesting you say that transition from the really bubbly and the happy, but also that really dark, deep story.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I've never got into, and you might just end this whole podcast right now when I tell you this, is Final Fantasy 14. Now, I am not an MMO guy. They've just never clicked with me. I've never got into MMOs, and I get told by so many people Final Fantasy 14 has the best story ever, but they're like, you have to get through about 15 to 20 to maybe almost 50 hours to get to the bulk of it. What is it about 14 that means so much to you? Because I know you lot love it.
Yeah, no, I really do like it. And I will be honest with you, I haven't actually gotten to that point yet where the story is like boss, and you know, it's where everybody just exclaims from the hills about it. But I think like the one thing I do love about Final Fantasy 14, as opposed to everything else that's kind of going on at Square Enix, is how they treat the community. They're quite community focused. The events that they put on, the fan events, like that's some of the best conferences that I've ever been to in my entire life, is a Final Fantasy 14 fan event. You know, they're really a tight group. They're not afraid to laugh at each other, which is great. Like Yoshi P is just awesome. He's just so funny. So I think it's so much about that. It's so much about the community that Final Fantasy 14's built that makes it so appealing to other people. But I completely empathize and agree with the fact that like not everybody, it's not accessible for everybody who has to play other games all the time as well. Like it's just having to sink 50 hours in order for it to get good. It's a really big commitment. And
yeah, it's like when people tell me to watch an anime and they're like, I watched the first 3 and I'm like, I'm not like it. They're like, no, it's good. You just got to watch 100 episodes. I'm like, I don't have time to watch 100 episodes for it to get good. All right.
I know.
So, Laura, Square's had a really kind of bumpy time. So, Final Fantasy 13 kind of wasn't reviewed really great. When Final Fantasy 14 first came out, it was a mess. Final
Yeah.
Fantasy 15 is such a sore subject for a lot of fans. Obviously, Versus 13 looked like one of the most incredible things ever. How do you feel about Final Fantasy 15?
Oh, I have such a big soft spot for Tabata, the director. You know, I got to meet him, which was really an incredible experience. And like I was certain before 15 came out that the story would be the strongest suit of 15. I was just like, you know, coming off of Final Fantasy Type 0 HD, which was incredible. The storyline is amazing. And the gameplay is quite similar to Final Fantasy 7 Remake, if I'm honest, because it's the switching characters and stuff. So I was just like, you know, I'm ready. Like, even if the gameplay stinks, I know that Tabby's got me with the good story. And then when I came out, and I was just kind of like, this story is like just really shallow. Like, this is not hitting the things that it needs to hit. And then creating these scenarios to have DLC, I was really quite angry during that time, quite angsty during that time, because of the fact that I was so against gatekeeping story in a Final Fantasy game through DLC. Because that's just not what Final Fantasy was about. Like, what's the
Yeah.
point in having an unfinished story with a Final Fantasy game when story is the biggest bit? So like when it first came out, I was very upset. But as it's gone on, they have managed to fill out the story quite a bit with the DLC, and it is quite a different experience to what it was before.
Yeah.
However, it's still that thing where it's just like, oh, it could have been so much better. It could have been so much better.
It's funny because I enjoy Final Fantasy 15. I love Noctis as a protagonist. Yeah. I really enjoy the world, love the music. It's really funny because I didn't like Prompto the whole game until I played his DLC. And when I played his DLC, it proper touched me. I was like, oh my goodness, it shows such a different side. And I feel like basically Versus 13, that being announced and the hype around it and people losing their mind kind of just destroyed what Final Fantasy 15 was, because they was always trying to catch the tail of what Versus 13 was and everything they showed, and they just couldn't manage it. So even though for me it's an enjoyable game, the experience is really getting. One of the things I do really love though, I feel like Final Fantasy 15 was a testing ground for Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and if 15 was never the way it was, I don't think the combat in Remake would be that great. Now we're a short form podcast, so we're kind of running out of time. We could talk about Final Fantasy all day, but I think it's really important to talk about you as well, because like I said, you do some incredible things with Jinx, with the channel, but one of the things that you do a lot behind the scenes that people don't know, you're very much great for champion diversity and making sure that the males and females and black faces and all different types of demographics are seen in the industry. So for anyone who's just coming across you today and they're like, I like the way she talks about Final Fantasy, can you just give us a little summary about who you are?
Yeah, completely. I mean, for the past, like, I would say almost 2 years or so, I've been working on a project called She Plays Games, which is a podcast where I celebrate women in games. And it's been amazing. I mean, being able to meet so many women in games, and this extends well beyond just development, streamers, content creators. I don't want to make it too pigeonholed, because we all make the industry what it is. Content creators have such a big effect on how games do nowadays in comparison to anything else. So yeah, I talk to women. I talk with women about like all of the hardships that they've had, their journeys into games, advice for a next generation. because I really want to open people's eyes to the possibilities of what roles are out there, which I didn't have growing up. And I still feel like if I was exposed to more women who were working in the industry and the different roles that I could have access to, my life would probably be different. Like my career would I would have maybe chosen a different path. And so it's really just about helping young women and people who are considering their careers at the moment to find how they can fit into the industry and feel accepted.
I love that. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me. Look, we ran out of time already. It goes so quick. We could have spoken so much more about Final Fantasy, but like I said, kudos with everything you're doing with the Final Fantasy Union. Loving what you're doing with Pixel Perfect. So keep on being great. Keep on being amazing. If you wanted to send people to go and check out your content, where would you send them to?
Just head on over to @ShePlaysPodcast on Twitter and TikTok. And then also at Level Up Lauren if you just want hot takes on various other games that I'm into.
Love it. Now, she's been Lauren. I've been Mr. Midas. You've been the MVPs. Thank you to staying to the end of the video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up. Make sure you give it a like, a subscribe. And if you're listening to us on podcast services, come on, drop us that 5-star rating. We out of here. Peace.
Bye.